I love working with my colleagues. I love it when I get to bounce ideas between each other. I love it when we get to complement each other's knowledge and to use those combined talents to solve complex technical or business challenges. Basically, I just love working in close-knit teams. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened quite as often as I would have liked it to. All too often, I've seen team members working on different things. Sometimes they're working on different stories or features in the same project. Sometimes they're even working on entirely different projects. Everybody is working on something different. And they do that so that they can be, sometimes because they actually have to be, independent from each other. And I find that an interesting word, independent, especially in a team situation. Because in those situations, are we actually a team? Or are we just a collection of colleagues working independently on the same island of desks? And that word, independence, it's not free. It comes with costs. Inside of my team, I have way less insight into what everybody's doing. Outside of a 15-minute stand-up in the morning where everybody's talking about unconnected things, so we all get bored and we all drift and we zone out. But outside of that, I don't know what my colleagues are doing. And because of this disconnect, because some connection is lost between our team members, even if we're a really close team otherwise, that whole thing that I love of bouncing ideas, of helping each other, it just becomes really hard. Woo! And apparently my computer just suddenly goes, "Way, let's go forward 10 slides," and then do nothing else. Where were we? We were here. I apologize for that. Anybody know how to work a computer here? There we go. So, because when we try to bounce ideas between each other, because when we try and help each other, it means that we have to do a context switch. We've got to interrupt what that other person is doing. And it gives teams other issues as well. We now have way more work in progress. We have, I'm going to say, at least one story per developer. Maybe realistically, we have multiple stories per developer because we get stuck on one and we start a second one, and one's waiting further down in the chain. Everything just takes longer to complete because we only have this one person working on it. And then we get testing. In my experience, when working like this, testing becomes a huge bottleneck because we have lots of different people and they're doing work to get stories out. And then all of a sudden, everybody piles on the tester with, "Can you test this so that it can go forward?" The tester gets drowned. And then if each team member has their own set of stories that they're working on because they're used to doing these things, then it often turns into each team member has their own specialized area. And that gives us an issue if, say, someone wins a lottery and they quit the next day. Or maybe more realistically, they go on vacation or they move back to Northern Ireland. Or if they just get ill for a day and they're suddenly not available. All of these things interrupt our ability to provide value to our users in a timely fashion. But I'm supposed to be talking about pair programming, and I haven't quite touched on that yet. So why do I think that these things are connected? Well, one way that I've seen to help teams to not fall into that trap of being independent colleagues at the same island of desks is to pair program. When practiced, when done right, we get to work together, and I mean really together, to think of those better solutions, to encourage that better collaboration, and to get everything implemented with less lead time. Hi, I'm Stacy Cashmore, Tech Explorer DevOps for Omniplan, as said, based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and we build financial advice software. I've been a developer since the mid-1990s, and as I just heard yesterday, for the last 3 years, I am honored to be able to call myself a Microsoft MVP in developer technologies. Now, over my career since the mid-90s, I have worked in loads of different industries, companies, lots of different roles, and I have seen many different ways that teams can work together. Some of them have been better than others. At a previous job, I saw the whole gamut. I was there for 14 years. I started back in 2006. And we went through lots of different ways of working together during my career there. When I first started, everybody was independent. We didn't have teams. We just had a department. In fact, my first project on day one, when I got my laptop, was to implement this really complex algorithm in the middle of the car insurance system by myself. We did have some bigger projects, and they did have more people working on them, but they still weren't a team. They were each had their own different thing, and they were working on their own facet in a way that meant they couldn't work with others and didn't need to work with others. And we saw the issues that this could bring us. So in 2012, we decided to try Scrum. We decided to make teams, put stable members in those teams, make those teams responsible for their own products within our system. And it failed. And it failed because we were still kind of working as individuals in those projects. In fact, we even got questions from the team. How can we all work on the same project? We're in the same code base. Sometimes we're in the same page. We're in absolute merge hell, and it's just slowing us down. Over the coming 8 years until I left, we tried to experiment with lots of different things to try and improve this situation. Some worked more than others. The last team I was with before I left the company, we loved experimenting. That team was fantastic. You could come up with an idea and they would want to try it just to see if it worked or not so we could get the learnings. And pair programming became a huge part of the way that we worked. And it was an amazing learning experience. It took a huge amount of effort to actually get it working. But that effort, we got dividends paid back on it. Not only for the developers, not only for the team, but also for the company as a whole. So, if I say it's so great, if I say it is so awesome, why isn't everybody just doing this? And when I talk to people about pairing, I often get the same answer. It's a waste of our time. 2 developers on 1 machine, you are not going to produce twice as much. It is pointless. And strangely enough, I don't only get that from the companies that are paying those 2 developers to sit at 1 machine. I also get it from developers when I ask if they've tried it. And the problem is, going by my personal experience, far too often, they're not wrong. You see, there are things which, if they happen, and believe me, if you try this, I would expect them to happen, and they make pairing less than great. So I want to talk about some of the most common ones. And I want to start with sleepy pairing. I'm sure that many people who have tried pair programming have seen this. In fact, in all the times I've given this talk, I've only ever had one person come up to me and go, nope, don't recognize any of that. It was just awesome fun day one and it took nothing. But generally what you get is 2 or more people behind one computer, and you got one person at the keyboard. And they are feverishly working away at this keyboard. They are working through the problem. They are coming up with a solution in their head. They are turning it into code. They're putting that code into the computer, and then they're fighting that computer when the solution doesn't quite do what they want. The other members of the pair, though, one or 2 things. Either they're sitting right behind the shoulder of the person at the keyboard, staring over the shoulder at the screen, making them feel really uncomfortable. Or the other one that I see quite often is a person, I don't know, maybe a meter or so away, playing with their phone, completely distracted. Occasionally they will look up at the screen and go, yep, before returning to Facebook, Twitter, shooting zombies in an MMO. And I liken this to a long car journey. You've got the driver. They're concentrating the whole day. They are looking for traffic problems. They're trying to figure out which way they need to go. They're watching the road, trying to keep everybody safe. Passengers, they're just struggling to stay awake, basically. You got that backseat driver staring at the steering wheel and the dashboard, making the driver feel really uncomfortable. You got the other passenger that just sits and stares out of the window, watches the world go by. And then you've got the one that I'm always really jealous of that doesn't get motion sickness and can just binge watch Netflix until either their data's gone or their battery's dead. Wish I could do that. At the end of the journey, the driver gets out of the car. They stretch, they walk inside, they're looking for somewhere to recuperate. They're exhausted. They've been concentrating so long. They have this headache. All they want to do is just sit down and close their eyes. Passengers, meanwhile, they're also exhausted, but more from boredom than anything else. And so it is with our drivers and sleepy pairing. That person that's done the heavy lifting, they've got the same workload as they would normally have had. They have done everything, but they're more tired than they normally would be because they've been doing this with a person watching every single key press whilst not actually having any help from that person. They've just spent the whole day feeling judged. And that person staring over the shoulder, do not underestimate how tiring it is to watch somebody code but not actually be involved in the solution. And that person who's a meter away, they have an awesome score on that zombie game. They've also got this feeling that maybe they should have been a little bit more use. Either one of these second people, they're feeling useless because of it. And so, next day, everybody just goes back to working on their own. If we're back in the office, then we put on our noise-cancelling headphones, drown out the open plan, and we go back to working independently. You know what? Previous day, complete waste of time, and so is pairing. But it's not only that person at the person away from the keyboard that can be sleepy. That person typing, they can be sleepy too. And the results, believe it or not, are just as bad. I generally see this happen when people start to use the driver and navigator roles for the first time. We have the driver. They have the keyboard. They are entering the code. We have the navigator. They are solving the problem and they're telling the driver what to type. Now, doing this, it can have an immediate benefit. That sleepy person doing all of the watching the day before, if they're taking the navigator role, they can't do that. Neither the yupper nor the zombie killer can do either of those things. They have to be actively involved in the solution, or the driver can't drive. We have involvement from all parties. We are working together to solve problems. The navigator is working through the solution, coming up with ideas. The driver's listening to that and then putting the code in at the keyboard. It sounds idyllic. This is how I want to work. People around the typist are actively involved. No more yupping, no more zombies. Only, I'm not so sure. All too often, when we try this for the first time, there is a zombie. It's just not that one in that massively multiplayer online game. It is the typist. And I'm using that word deliberately, typist. They are sitting behind the keyboard and they are banging in the words and the symbols that the navigator tells them to. But while they're doing this, they're not thinking about what they type into the computer. Have you ever seen the stories about drivers using satellite navigation and ending up in the wrong place? They take everything that the sat nav says and they do it without thinking. Now, the stories that I've read, people have ended up just lost. People have ended up in the middle of fields. The worst ones that I've seen are people ending up driving into water or even the wrong country. There was a guy that had a sat nav. He put in the city and the street and didn't realize that two countries next to each other had the same city and street name available, and they didn't check where they were driving to. I do not know how you cross the border and don't think of this, but that is what the story said. Navigation system says, you have arrived. And you think, well, maybe. But arrived where? How did I get here? Why are my feet wet? And now with our developers, at the end of the day, that person who's done all the thinking, our navigator, they are exhausted and they are frustrated because they have been doing all of the thinking, but they've had to wait for the person at the keyboard. That person at the keyboard who's not using the shortcuts that they know would help, that isn't using the keyboard combinations that they know would just make us move along, but they can't carry on with their solution until the driver's caught up. Otherwise, we're going to get completely disconnected from each other and we're just going to get totally lost. And that typist, bashing those keys with no thoughts, they're also exhausted. Yesterday, the typist was exhausted because they were doing the heavy lifting alone. Today, they're exhausted because they've just spent the day putting somebody else's words into a computer, and that's not why they became a software developer. Stack Overflow excluded, of course. So the next day, everybody returns to their own machines. We put on our noise-cancelling headphones to drown out the open plan office, and we go back to working independently. Previous day, that was a complete waste of time, and, except for seriously complex problems, so is pairing in general. Now, these two issues, the sleepy navigator, the sleepy driver, teams can find it very hard to continue at this point. My experience has been that once we reach one of these stages, breaking through is just so hard. And I've done it multiple times with multiple teams, and we've actually stopped the experiment just because we couldn't break through. And these disadvantages, I say, they're also used as some of the biggest reasons why companies and developers just say that it's not worth it to pair. It's simply too costly. Teams give up before they have even started. But there are things that we can do to help this situation. And they make it not only so that pairing works, but it also pays those dividends back that we need to put in, or for the effort that we need to put in to make it happen. So I want to tackle the sleepy navigator first. Now, when we first started to pair, we noticed that the world is full of distractions, and this is a problem. Some of them are in the real world, and we just have to work through. Things like we're in an open plan office, and people are having a meeting 2 desks down, and they are talking really, really loudly. Or we have an open plan office, and people are walking up and down next to the desk, and it just distracts you every time that happens. The other one, which is really annoying in an office, is I'm a developer and I am not sitting at a keyboard, so everybody assumes I'm not busy, because if I'm not typing, I can't be busy as a developer. Some problems, though, they're more virtual. Things like our phones. Most of us are addicted to our phones. I know that I am. They provide us with a world of distraction. Email, Slack, Teams, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. And we get a dopamine hit when we check these things. In fact, there's been studies showing that because of the way that we use our phones these days, our brain actually, the structure has changed so that we go chasing that dopamine kick from looking at our phones. And if we're not busy typing, it becomes all too easy to allow ourselves to give into this distraction. But most of the time when I give this phone in person, there's generally one or two people in the audience that look up really sheepishly about now and put their phones back into the pocket. Now, breaking this habit is kind of a personal thing because everybody has to do it in their own way. But I can say what worked for me. First off, it took a lot of mental energy. This was not simple. First thing I tried to do was put my phone kind of out of the way. So I put it at arm's length on the table next to me so that I couldn't easily check it. That didn't work. And it didn't work because all I had to do was stretch, get the phone, and then stretch and put it back. Now, this is fantastic for your daily exercise. It is not good to be getting rid of this distraction. Eventually, I realized I just had to get rid of it full stop. I was pairing at a colleague's desk who sat opposite me. And I took my phone and I very carefully, because it's a glass smartphone, not a Nokia 3310, tossed it underneath the monitor so that it was on my desk. I can now not reach it at all anymore. And the impact of this was instant. It hurt. It hurt a lot. It felt awful. Like I say, I know I'm addicted to my phone. But it did also work. After a while, that pain started to go away, and I found that I could concentrate more. Most of the things that I had on my phone, they're not urgent. Twitter, WhatsApp, TikTok, it's just FOMO, that fear of missing out. You get used to doing the checking, but once you can't anymore, it disappears rapidly enough. What I really struggled with was email. Now, this is because when I'm working at my own machine, if a really important mail comes in, I get a pop-up, I know it's there, and I can deal with it. Now, we can talk about how bad that habit is on its own, but that's what I had. But it meant that if somebody urgently needed something from me, a question that needed answering right now, a major issue that I needed to be involved in, production's on fire and the website's down and I need to do something, I knew about it, I could get on with it, and I did it. When I'm pairing, I didn't have that available to me. I did have my phone, so I could check my emails to make sure that nothing's coming in. Now I don't have my phone either, and I really did stress that I was missing important things and that we could have problems because of this. Took me a while to realize it, but you know what? It's not a problem at all. Because if something is that urgent that me not answering inside of 5 minutes is a problem, someone's going to come and find me. They're not just going to fire that email off and forget about it. They are going to come and find me, and we are going to solve the problem. And if they're not coming to find me, you know what? It's just not that important. So everybody in the team kind of figured out on their own how to work through their own distractions. And it meant that we could get more into the flow. We could start to work better as a pair. But we're still only dealt with a sleepy navigator. We still need to take care of that sleepy driver. This was not a personal thing. This was a whole team effort to figure out what we needed to do to make this work. What worked for us is to re-examine those definitions of the driver and the navigator and to tighten them up a little bit. So we ended up with the navigator, somebody who thinks of a solution but doesn't tell the driver what to do at a key press level. No, they explain their idea to the driver, and they do this until the driver understands enough to write their own code. And the driver was somebody who listens to the navigator, understands what the navigator is trying to do, and then turns that understanding into code and puts that into the computer. Returning to our driving metaphor one last time. When you're driving and you're using your satellite navigation, your job is not to listen to that and do what it tells you without thinking. No. Your job is to take those instructions, to think about them, to check they're right, to check that it's safe to use them, and to get yourself, your passengers, and your vehicle to the correct location safely. And so it is with the driver in a pair. it's not just somebody who follows instructions to put that if statement on line 19. It's somebody who listens to the navigator to understand what they're trying to achieve. And when you don't code anything. And as a navigator, when this happens, you need to change how you're explaining it so that the driver does understand it. And if you really can't explain it, then get up, go to a whiteboard and walk through your ideas with a driver. I've actually seen the best solutions come from following this approach. What you don't do, and what I've seen all too often, is quickly grab the keyboard, start writing some code and say, I'm just going to give this back to you in a second. Because the second you do this, you're back in sleepy pairing. You've got that one person who is doing the thinking, the solving, and the typing, and another that has no idea what's going on. Don't think that the drivers get it any easier, though. Because at some point, your head is going to go, click. You now know exactly what you have to do. You're getting excited because you know how to solve this problem. And you don't just start putting your undoubtedly awesome solution in at the keyboard. No, you've got to excitedly give that keyboard to the navigator, tell them about your amazing idea, and switch roles. Because again, if you just start typing, navigator's no longer in the process. They're asleep again because they have no idea what it is that you're trying to achieve. We found that if we ensured that each person fulfilled the roles in this way without distraction, everybody being an active member of the pair, then we could move from sleepy pairing into strong pairing. Now, this seems awesome, I hope, but I'm giving this talk remotely. We've had a few years of not being in the office, and many of us want to carry on doing remote work. So let's talk remote for a few minutes. Now, I first gave this talk back in 2020, and it was at the same conference when I was lucky enough to be asked to take part in .NET Rocks, a .NET podcast. And the subject was, of course, pair programming, based on my talk from the previous day. And at one point, one of the hosts asked me about pair programming. Remote pair programming. Wasn't something we'd discussed before, and it was a huge curveball for me. I'd not spent any time thinking about it up until that point. And if you ever listen back to the episode, you'll see that, because I start off my answer with, Well, I've done it once. It actually worked well. It was with a colleague, and I was busy pairing with them in the morning, but for some reason I needed to be home in the afternoon. Now, at that point, we didn't have audio, because for some reason we weren't allowed audio on our machines. We didn't have video. And so we were communicating through Slack, through Notepad in a shared screen, and just basically sharing our desktop with each other. It was really hard. But it actually still worked. Even in that situation, it actually kind of worked. But I followed that up with a proviso. I think it will only work if you have the psychological safety needed for pair programming in place before you start to remotely pair. And it's something that we shouldn't underestimate. When we pair, we need to have a huge amount of psychological safety. You've got to be open about your understanding of your colleague's solution. You've got to be open about where your knowledge stops, domain knowledge or technical knowledge. And this can be hard. The colleague I was working with on this day, we had an awesome relationship. We paired really often in real life. I'm going to be honest, we paired too often in real life because it meant we didn't pair with the other members of the team as much as we should. But we worked well together. We could bounce off of each other. And so these hardships offered by our woefully inadequate situation, they didn't really hit us too hard. But I thought without that trust and that safety that we had, you couldn't do remote pairing before that point. I really wouldn't like to try it without that. The challenges would just be too super hard. To put it into context, this was 3 weeks before lockdown in the Netherlands. Haha, we didn't really have that much choice. Also about this time, I was changing jobs. In fact, I got back from that conference and I started a new job the next day. And my job was to help people change in what they do and improve the way they work. And let's face it, nobody likes that. So I spent 3 weeks annoying everybody. And then we started remotely working. And you know what? Everybody started to pair program. It started to work really well together. Teams started mob sessions first thing in the morning. They worked together, dropping in and out as the day went remotely. And believe me, they did not do any of this in the office. The reason why I think it worked at that point is because we went from that everybody's in the office together to nobody can see each other literally overnight. And everybody missed the companionship that you get in an office. They missed the coffee moments. They missed lunch. They missed the just taking 5 minutes break with each other. And they're actually using the pairing and mobbing sessions to replace this. It did, however, give us some huge challenges. Kind of similar to the ones that we had in person, but now they're just blown up to a much bigger proportion. Firstly, sleepy pairing, so much harder to avoid. The whole team has to work so hard to make sure that everybody is engaged, because it's so easy when you're remote to just tune out if you're in a different location. People disappeared from the stream. They didn't join in, but it wasn't actually noticed that they weren't joining in. They were on mute. They had their video off. If they didn't feel that they had anything to concentrate, they just went quiet. They're watching a shared screen in Teams, which is possibly blurry, possibly shrunken code window, and they just fade away. When you're doing this in person, you can see when that happens. And you can try and do something to spark the session back into life. Let's go grab a drink. Let's take a walk. Let's play table football for 5 minutes and just get some energy back in. If I can't physically see the other person, it just becomes so much harder to be able to do that. The other issue that we had is role switching. If you're pairing, you should be role switching on a regular basis as those ideas come into your head and come into your colleague's head, and you go backwards and forwards and share the load of the day. If you're remote, this becomes a whole lot more difficult because either you have to share your really blurred screen, and I now have to work via this shrunken window with bad colors in somebody else's environment with their extensions, or the alternative is they need to commit their code, which I hope works. They need to push it up to the central repo. I need to pull that repo down. I need to open it up. And then I need to remember what my awesome idea was, which is why we started this whole thing in the first place. All of these context switches, they just make it so much harder to remember what you're doing. And so the chances are we just didn't do it as often as we should have done. Because of this, the driver can get to be a lot more a sole person at a keyboard, and the navigators just completely go to sleep. It's also harder to bounce ideas around. When you've only got your voice and you're not able to use your body language, it can be a lot harder to get your ideas across. It's also a lot harder to have multiple people speaking at the same time. Now, I have audio processing disorders, and if I'm in a meeting room with 4 people and there's 2 different conversations going on, I find it really hard to follow anything that's going on in that room. You put that inside of Zoom or inside of Teams, and all of a sudden, you've got different people lighting up in the video feed in front of you. Zoom is cutting off the audio from one person and then cutting it in for another. And it's just a cacophony of noise, which is impossible to follow. Most of us find conversations so much harder online than we do in real life. things we tried to do to help this situation. Number one, we're .NET developers, so we're Microsoft shop, so we use live share, either in Visual Studio Code or in Visual Studio. Now that experience has been interesting. Sometimes it has been awesome. It is amazing. You get a link to join somebody else's session. I can see what they're typing on my screen in my theme with my extensions. And if I need to take over, I can just take over. Sometimes it has been profanity-inducing annoyance when it doesn't work. It crashes two machines, not just one, and everybody has to reboot before they can continue. Like I say, when it works, it does work really well. Like I say, I'm no longer looking at my colleague's HD plus widescreen monitor on my screen where everything's squashed up so I can't read it. They're not looking at my 4K monitor on their screen where everything's squashed in from the side and they can't see anything. We're using our own monitors, our own machines, our own setups. It really did make those switches a lot easier. If you're not in an environment where you can use live share or an equivalent tool, then we tried using the Pomodoro technique, making sure that we forced ourselves to switch roles regularly. So we'd start a Pomodoro, 25 minutes. We are going to achieve this. Who's driving? Who's navigating? We would do those 25 minutes, check where we got to, take a 5-minute break to get out of the monitor, get out of the camera. And then we'd come back, we'd switch roles, and we would continue with the next task. Finally, the other thing that we saw that really helped with this, especially when we have more than 2 people in a call, is somebody taking on the role of devil's advocate. And they used that role to make sure that we stayed on track and to make sure that we didn't stray. So that person would be the one checking that we are not running away on our own, making sure that people being quiet are brought into the conversation, making sure that we have considered all possible avenues and that we're not just doing something without thinking. Now, with all of this put together, it is still harder to pair program remotely than in the office, but the discipline's there. It still works amazingly well. And a lot of teams that I work with at the moment, they still use this, at least for some of their work, even though we're back in the office now. And they do that because they have seen the benefits that it can bring. First of which, collaboration. Of course, we now have to work together. We're not working on different things. We are working on one thing and we are getting it finished. We are bouncing ideas around in order to do this. We are helping each other improve in the process. And that is helping each other improve with domain knowledge. Financial advice is an amazingly complex thing, and having somebody that has a different facet of information to you just strengthens the both of you. We're improving our knowledge of our tech stack. Any tech stack is huge and nobody can know everything. But when you've got 2 people working together, you can join forces, teach each other, and you can make it do awesome things. And also the way that we use that tech stack, using our ideas to solve those complex domain problems. We communicate way more and way better than we used to. Now this one is a little bit chicken and egg. I honestly don't know. Did we improve our communication and so we improved our ability to pair program? Or did we learn how to pair program and our communication evolved organically as we did so? I said, I really don't know, but either way, our communication improved. And it meant that we were sharing knowledge more, and we're sharing it more because we're sharing it by default. And that means that when that person wins a lottery and quits the next day, or goes on vacation, or moves to Northern Ireland, or they're ill for a day, it doesn't give us that same huge problem that we had before. Because we're pairing, there's always 2 people that know what's going on. Each person in the pair. And that remaining person, they can start a new pair and they can share the knowledge yet again. It also made our pull request process a lot smoother. And it did so because it's an ongoing process. When you get pairing right, You get the driver validating the solution that the navigator is trying to explain. We are validating those thoughts in real time. And the navigator is validating that the driver is turning that into code, which is correct. Again, at real time as they are producing it. We can spot issues earlier. And it meant that when we came to do pull requests, and in a pair, we managed to keep those smaller and more manageable, the entire flow was double check the changes that we're about to commit. If everything's okay, then commit it and push it up. If something snuck in, fix it before you commit it and push it. And then we go away and we make our PR, and the person who's navigating approves it, and we can grab a drink and continue. Now, I said that check your commit before you push it. This is so, so important. And if you don't do that, you can scrap this whole benefit. But when you get it right, it's so much better than the way that we used to do pull request, which was finish something, open a pull request, and throw it at a colleague and annoy them with it. And then they're going to do one or two things. They're either going to interrupt what they're doing to do your pull request, or they're going to make you wait until they have time to do your pull request. They're going to make comments, ask questions, and then they're going to throw it back. Now, I'm in the middle of a new task. So either I'm going to interrupt my task, or I'm going to leave it even longer before I go back and answer those comments, and we can ping pong this. And I've seen pull requests take days, weeks to get through the system in the worst cases. And if during this process, somebody spots something which is a serious change to your code, it might be that you have to rethink your entire solution. And you're doing this after you think you've finished everything, which is even more annoying, which is even more time consuming. And we could have saved that right at the start by having that constant feedback. When we do the PR on the fly as we go, the only context switch that we actually have is when we're switching to the next task. And I kind of think that's acceptable. The last benefit I want to talk about is one that we were not expecting when we started, and that is our onboarding process. Whenever you start a new job, it is always such a daunting task, at least it is for me. You get introduced to 100 people and you instantly forget every single name that you've heard. You get a machine, a big stack of paperwork, which these days is probably a link to a wiki. And you spend your time trying to learn the system and trying to be productive. On some of the big systems, it can take weeks or more. I've worked at one company where they didn't expect a developer to be productive for 3 months because of learning the system. But rather than doing that, how about we take the new person and we pair them up with somebody who's been there for a while once they've installed their machine and forgotten everybody's name? By doing that, we get a few benefits. The newbie, they get all of the insights and experience of their partner. How the domain works, where to find code, how the solution's set up, how does the team develop code, why we made certain choices to do things in the past, all of this type of thing that normally you've got to dig through. And that partner, the experienced one, it's not that they don't get anything out of this. They get the clear insight that only somebody with no preconceived ideas about a project can bring into it when they see it for the first time. This is not going to be as productive as two experienced people working together, but it's going to be far more productive than just sticking somebody with a stack of paperwork and saying success. So I want to leave you with some thoughts. First off, why do I advocate pairing? Because I love talking about this. I love doing this, and I wish that I could do it more often. Basically, as G. Paul Hill on Twitter says when he's talking about test-driven development, I advocate for pair programming because we are in this for the money. Pairing, when practiced right, when done right, it gets value into the hands of our users quicker. And it gets that value there with more thought put into it, both how it works and how it's built. I love pairing. one or multiple people. I love it because of the benefits that I see that it brings to me as an individual, to the teams that I've worked with, to the companies I've worked for. Make no mistake, this is hard. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it, and I wouldn't be talking about it. But I invite you to give it a go. Put in that effort at the start. Fight your way through those sleepy stages and find what works for you. See what benefits it brings you. I've been Stacy Cashmore. Thank you so much for your time.